So we're back in Combat Mission Shock Force 2, and today I want to really do a little bit of a showcase about the British Royal Marines. What's really important is that the Royal Marines are light infantry. I've had to borrow basically the British Army light infantry battalion and tweak it quite heavily to make it reflect a Royal Marine formation, which is a little bit different. As with all light infantry in this version of the game, open maps against things like armour with lots of fire support given to the enemy is just going to end up in very high casualties. You need to be quite specific in the kinds of maps, terrain, and force selections that you use against light infantry. That said, no light infantry is completely helpless. To do a little bit of a showcase of the Royal Marines, I've put this force selection together. It's a company group. It's got control over a light gun battery as well, with its own forward observer. The recce troop and manoeuvre support are both mounted on jackals, and there's a significant number of them, so you can put down a really good base of fire, which, if you are manoeuvring your infantry on foot, you really do need. Being mobile as well means you can get them out of the way of enemy artillery if they spot your fire support position. I don't know how authentic it actually is to have this much mounted on jackals, but it'll suit our purposes for the game. Added to that, there's a machine gun troop as well with tripod mounted GPMGs. There's also an anti-tank troop with javelins, and there's a couple of snipers that are attached to the company HQ as well. Strictly speaking, they should be attached to the recce troop, but they're just easier to command in the game attached to the company HQ. The main thing I want to do is play the battle at night, because I've done exactly what I said not to do and chosen an open map, so I'm going to have to get an entire company of infantry across a valley with no cover at all. I'm hoping that the Syrians don't have night vision, and I want to give my vulnerable infantry every advantage possible. This is the map with friendly forces behind a large ridge at the bottom of the map, and on the other side of a shallow valley we've got, from left to right, we've got the road southwest, which is on probably the biggest hill on the map, which then dips down into a gorge and then up again onto a rising hill up to the other corner of the map. Obviously in front of that there's the town, which I expect to be garrisoned by at least a platoon or two. And then round to the right it dips into a large ball with pretty impossible sightlines into it unless you're in one of the buildings in the town or right in the ball itself. If I can keep my manoeuvre support from having their evening ruined by artillery, then I'm going to use them to cover 1 and 2 troops assault into the town, as well as detaching 3 troop and up onto the ridge to the left and then turning right to support. I'm hoping I can force a surrender before I have to deal with the objective on the right flank, but if needs be I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. The ridge was obviously going to get shelled on the first turn, so I hold as much of my force back as possible, but it still doesn't stop a couple of casualties being taken even this far back. Once the shelling's over, I push up the recce jackals, and knowing how much of a glass cannon they are themselves, they see something on the opposite ridge that they really don't like and reverse off it. It turns out to be a recoilless rifle team which gets the treatment from the mortars. At the same time, the recce jackals spot that for some reason there's about a company size infantry unit on the hill on the right hand side, right in the corner of the map, so I duly oblige with the light guns. This does seem to make the enemy commander really quite cross, and he responds by revenge shelling most of the map, which forces me back behind the ridge. It does cross my mind at this moment that if he decided to manoeuvre over this ridge towards us, we'd be in a spot of bother. There's several turns the shelling does finally stop and I can get the jackals back up on fire support ridge and start to move the infantry. As the Marines actually reach the village and the fire support blazes overhead, they use a perfectly appropriate amount of violence to start storming the first buildings. At the same time, 3 Troop doesn't really encounter that much resistance up on the left hand side hill. The jackals have pretty much wiped everything out up there. They can even start lending a hand supporting the village, even though I haven't asked them to yet. This is the really crucial part of the battle now, and the fight in the village really does start to get hairy. There's an AGS grenade machine gun in the back of the village somewhere that starts to cause casualties to the Marines. Once the Marines get into the first set of buildings though, they just pour fire into the building it's using as a firing position, and the troops in there quickly surrender. It's followed by a general surrender on the next turn, which really surprises me, and I have to say I felt a little bit cheated by it. That's until I realised the number of casualties the enemy had taken. Their right flank had completely collapsed on the left-hand hill, and their positions in depth behind the village had been absolutely decimated by the fire support and the artillery. The AGS teams in the town had been something of a last stand, and a mortar barrage that I'd put into the final objective in the ball had obviously been a lot more effective than I could have imagined. In the final analysis, I did have only 10 killed and injured, whereas the enemy had 325. It was probably the correct decision to surrender. The Royal Marines are an elite unit, and I'd up the skill and experience level to reflect that in the force selector. In the end, they're still just as vulnerable as any other infantry if you use them in the wrong way. But their judicious use at night, with a good amount of fire support, was obviously the telling factor. Leave a like if this makes you more likely to use this kind of formation, and if there's any other formations in Combat Mission that you'd like me to showcase, then say so in the comments below.